Hey, what's up, viewer? Welcome back to this Nebulous live development creation series. This is day 10, hour 1, and I apologize up front for the lack of content for day 9. I only got 1 hour in, and it was mostly design discussions. I do intend to get a lot more done per day than 1 hour, so I apologize for that. In the previous video, I was setting up some extra code for the spawn system to start diversifying the randomness of what spawns around the player. And for that, I did a little bit of off-screen studying of like different types of suns to deal with that. So I suppose for this, feasibly the next step would be there could effectively be a star, like a star array of prefabs of star types as well. However, I'm not sure where I'm going to place that particular collection at this point. One idea I had was to use a scriptable object as a referable container of prefabs. However, I'm also considering just simply naming this script here. I'm just considering renaming it like spawn galaxy or something like that, and it will very likely have to do some extra work in the form of doing a lot of the initialization for choosing the positions of things. So I'm not sure structurally how I should design this, but I think for now, since we're rolling in this direction, I'm just going to keep it simple and make this just a prefab array. I'll call it star prefabs. And I have to run through again in the game and in the editor, and I've got to generate a couple of these prefab types. Alright, so I'm trying to make sure that I can remember all of them. So I'm going through it in my head. I know there was red supergiant, red giant, blue supergiant, then there's like an orange giant, and then there's like yellow white, and then it starts getting into like red dwarf, white dwarf, that might be good enough for now. There's also there's like a neutron, stuff like neutron stars. Okay, so actually classify these then. I guess I could just give them very literal names. So a very classic star is, of course, red supergiant. I think they're effectively the largest stars that exist. So I can drop a red supergiant in here, its original prefab. I'm going to have to go through this whole thing here where I generate graphs for them. And it's lit, but the red supergiant feasibly should in fact it should in fact generate its own light using emission, but that's something we'll have to deal with later. That's another point, by bumping the emission value up. So now we have a red star, not to be confused with our red lava planet. I'll have to tweak the sizes later. I think there is technically also a red giant. Which is more in line with like a giant orange star. And I put this correctly on there. Okay, yeah. Okay, I'm probably just gonna have to Google it here, so like I think this is maybe the one I was looking at. And I just need to double check here, so I get this right. This classifies there as being 7 main types of stars. There's also protostars. Main sequence, that's like our star. It's just like a white yellow star, blue star, red dwarf star, yellow dwarfs. So there's actually subtypes within the main 7 types, it looks like. Orange dwarf, supergiant stars. Blue giants. Blue supergiant, red giant. That's not even a red supergiant. It's 44 times the size. Red supergiant, white dwarf, neutron star, black hole. There's also a brown dwarf. And then there's types of binary stars as well, where they can like basically have like 2 stars close together orbiting each other or something like that. Okay, so let's run through this real quick. We've got neutron, white dwarf, red super, red giant, blue supergiant, blue giant, and then you're running into dwarf stars. Orange, yellow, red dwarf stars. Normal blue. Then there's main sequence stars, which is effectively our sun, if I'm not mistaken. And then there's protostars. Alright, so I'm going to scooch this over to the other screen so I can just kind of reference it. Alright, so we've got red supergiant, red giant, and then we went through a blue supergiant and a blue giant. So their blue supergiants are smaller than red supergiants. And then blue giants are blue-white giant, so it's like emitting white, but then blue on the edges. Okay, so let's go with those for now. So we'll drop this, we'll drop a star in. We'll simply call this one blue supergiant. And I apologize for the roteness of this, but I'm just gonna go through here and build all this. Now I'm gonna change this to say blue giant, which we can assume, I suppose, is a little bit smaller than a red giant, more or less. So we can fiddle that in there in terms of specifics at some point. And then blue giant, blue super, red super giant. That's 4 automatically. Then we're getting into dwarf stars and main sequence stars. And this is essentially calling our sun a yellow dwarf. So that could synonymize red dwarf, yellow dwarf, and orange dwarf stars as practically, and there's also a blue star. I think it's still saying that they are just gigantic stars. And then a main sequence star. I thought that was like our star. It says 90% of the universe's stars are main sequence, including our sun. And they can range anywhere from between 1/10 to 200 times the sun's mass. Okay, so now essentially how I'm feeling this is we could simply make a red star, a yellow star, and an orange star that are more or less stars that are simply smaller than supergiants and giants. So I guess that makes enough sense for now. So let's see, red. And I'll call this one yellow. And I might need to call it, I'm just going to call it star to make it more specific to the system. And it said the sizes are quite variable between the stars. They can be dozens of times different sized, more or less. Here's an orange star. Okay, so now we've got what? Now we have 7 star types. And we can still go up a few. We can go to Like there's white dwarf, which makes some sense as a star. And yellow star is effectively our star here. So that's what, 8? The only thing I'm lacking would be a neutron star. So neutron star, protostar, and brown dwarf are basically the 3 that I'm missing at the exact moment, but... And then technically there's black hole, but I'm debating on whether or not to use black holes at all as a star. Okay, so let's just go with these for now. What? Would you go around it? Would you go? Quit. Quit growling, puppy. Alright, so let's see here. Blue giant, blue supergiant, orange star. So I need to make an orange star shader graph. And this does allow for each of the stars to have a, in the long term, they can each have a specific like shading effect on them if need be. Oops, let's see if I can select this here. Alright, so now the orange star has orange star lit. Blue giant needs blue. Blue supergiant needs blue also. Orange star has orange star. Red giant needs red giant. And then it needs to be red, which is selected off the top, nifty. So let's see, red giant, orange star, blue supergiant, blue giant. Red giant, red star. Looks like red star still needs a shader graph. So the thing with this is each graph is probably also going to have a Fresnel node. And essentially the center of the star is white. And then the edges of the star are what actually take the color in, is essentially the plan. Which means I may have to go through each of these graphs and add the Fresnel effect at some point. But for now I'm just making it to where it can serve prototypically as a random element. And then red supergiant has its thing going on. White dwarf and yellow star both need a graph. Alright, so white dwarf here. Same deal, basically, it's just white. I'm not sure how the Fresnel node could differentiate that. Maybe it has to do with emission. If the center is usually white and it's white, I'll have to play around with it. It might just be a Fresnel node with a slight fall off on the edges. So I have a white dwarf, it's white. The main thing though is the size of these prefabs is incorrect for now. And then the yellow star is, of course, just yellow. Alright, so I'm gonna run through yellow, yellow star lit, white dwarf lit, red supergiant lit, red star lit, red giant lit, orange star lit, blue supergiant lit, and blue giant lit. Okay, so that's nifty enough for that. So let's jump into the active star system, and now we are throwing our star prefabs into the mix, which I think I can just go like this and drag them all in at once. The only thing missing from this arrangement is the fact that the sizes are not differentiated. Ah, crap, and it didn't, hold on, I've got to lock this, then grab these. Then drag them into star prefabs, and now we have a list of star prefabs. And I suppose I could be cheeky and organize them by size, which is something like this. I think. Maybe something like this. Let me take a quick look here. Yeah, it's just saying that our star is a little bigger than reds and oranges. Okay, so it does say red dwarfs are smaller than our star. Yellow stars are about our size, and then orange stars are kind of like this. So let's just leave it like this. I think this is good enough for now. Okay, so now we can randomize stars besides for their size differences, which is, I'm going to have to think about that as the scanning system comes together. There's planets, which there's an option to add a gas giant planet. I suppose I could just do that real quick here. And I also want to add I'm just going to call this planet types. And I'm just going to throw all of these into its own folder. And then we will be picky here, and we will add one more, which is the gas giant. Or we'll just call it a gas planet. We don't have to call it gas giant necessarily. Oh shoot, I screwed that up. I didn't want to name it that. This is what... Oh, it says it's locked. Okay. Call it gas planet, and we'll drag the gas planet prefab into here as an original prefab, and then we will add one more shader graph. I guess I can just call it gaslit. That works. I suppose that'll be fine. So we add the gas lit material, and then did I already color these correctly? Okay. So now I'm looking at simply picking some kind of color for this thing, and I'm thinking of like a teal sort of grade blue kind of thing like this, maybe. Okay, so 0.5, 0.6, and 0.3, 0.3, 0.5, 0.6. We'll go something like this. Even it still doesn't look gray enough though. So maybe 0.4, 0.5, 0.7. Let's see how this looks. 0.4, 0.5, 0.7. And that's automatically all the way over on the purple side of things, so let's just put this at like 0.3, 0.5, 0.7. How's that? Alright, so we'll call this gas giant for now. Right, I suppose they're all gas giants, but for now it's just generically called a gas planet. Alright, so now I can jump back in here and I will add gas planet to this list of options. Which of course is going to have a different set of like infrastructure rules. So this planet might operate outside of the bounds of typical planets. Let's see what happens. Alright, so I need two more prefab arrays. There's more or less a public game object array for moon prefabs, and then I also need a public game object array for signature prefabs. As for a moon, we can do that that can be pretty straightforward. We can just grab and I'm actually just going to synonymize them by adding a moon types folder in here. Inside of here I can just simply throw some prefabs in, so let's drop a planet up here. And I don't actually have any great ideas for this right now, so I'm just going to leave it at one moon. So simply use one moon type for now. Since I do not have a high diversity idea for types of moons, we'll just make this a moonlit shader. We'll drag the moon in here. Drop this moon off, and the moonlit will be gray, so it's practically this color already, maybe a little lighter. .7 seems like a good idea. And eventually, like, you know, it's gonna need like surface details and stuff, but I'm skipping that now. I'm not great enough yet with shaders and shader graph to be confident in whipping that up right here on the spot. So I'm going to double check how this looks. It's kind of light for a moon. It of course won't emit any of its own light, so it'll have to, whoops. You'll have to more or less receive light from other things, but it can more or less function as a moon. Alright, so that's pretty much set up. Let's make sure we add the moon prefab in here. And then last we just need some signature prefabs, so my idea for this was to still do this basically the same thing here. And use the planet as a prefab. And I'm debating might as well add a directory here for signature types. And then within here we will actually write up the types. So in this instance this is going to be an, the most straight up one is of course an asteroid field. That's just a go-to, more or less. So we'll drop the asteroid field into here. And you guessed it, we are creating another lit shader graph, which in the long run may wind up being more like a texture than anything. Or it might turn into a much more detailed texture, but for now we can just set it up to be like a dark brown color. We're sort of symbolizing more or less rocks, or like a gray brown, maybe something like this. It's a little funky. This needs to be like 0.1. Okay, so let's go something like this. And I'm not sure how that's going to fly, but all right, I'm going to play with it a little bit more. The emission is just too it's emitting it too brightly. It needs to be brown, more brown, darker brown here. Yeah, it's in a funky spot, that's for sure. Something more like this. Okay. And that just signifies an asteroid field, which theoretically, if you're scanning from the system view, there's a good shot that you literally wouldn't be able to see the rocks from that view. You would just get the signature, so this is getting to the point where I might need to make a UI element that spawns on top of the sig. And then once it's scanned all the way, then that gets replaced with... It might just be the same thing. It might just be an icon with like a texture of an asteroid field, more or less. Functionally speaking, though, I can simply use this to represent one of those. I can just use this to represent an asteroid field, basically. Okay, so the other type is going to be a gas field. We'll drop the gas field in here and make another shader graph. It's just going to be like the same thing, just a slightly different color. So I'm going to make this like a mix of green-blue-ish. Maybe somewhere in here. Zero 0.3, 2.5. Or 0.3, 0.25. This kind of just gives a murky, kind of similar to a gas planet, I suppose. So I'm getting into, so that kind of brings up an interesting issue. If there's gas planets, why would I need to go to these gas fields? So it's a good question. Because if I take a quick look at the gas planet, it's a little different, I guess. A little lighter. The only other thing I could add in here would be a pirate base, but I'm going to hold off on that because that blows open the AI development, and that's something I'm trying to save for later. So for now, I can simply come over here, lock this, and drop these into... Oh, whoops. First, just for technicality's sake, I'm going to make sure I rename this to gas field, not gas field lit. And then now I can actually drop them both in here as a signature prefab. Alright, so now I've got asteroid field spawning, gas field spawning, moons potentially spawning, planet types, and star types. Alright, so now I've really got to think about this because how I don't need a reference to all of these for every single system. So like essentially the galaxy will like plot a bunch of random nebula, and while it's doing that it can like give the nebula a number for stars, and then when the actual nebula starts building itself, it takes that number and it picks a random number of stars, or it picks from this group random number of star times, and then it will position the stars, and then each of those stars then has to decide on how many planets and signatures it has, and then the planets will have to decide on their own how many moons they've got, effectively. So I'm trying to consider if I should do this as a completely top-down sort of thing, or if it should like build more incrementally. I'm not sure exactly. For now, though, I suppose the first thing I can do is just do what I've been doing and assume that we are simply starting with one star system. And that star system needs to run the random values, which means it's not going to plot based off of initial values anymore. It has to define these randomly, but sensibly. And then it's not using these celestials anymore either. So it's not just hard generating these 4 planets at these 4 positions. Alright, so I'm going to have to open up the code and give this a bit of thought here. So there's also dealing with the capital planet specifically, which that could probably get handled somewhere else in the code, perhaps. A lot of this other stuff's pretty straightforward, though. But okay, so I haven't done this in a little while, but I'm rather sure essentially what we've got to do is we've got to generate an int for random sun type index. And I'm not remembering, I think there's a random dot let me just take a look here. This turn it returns a random point inside or on a circle. That might end up being really useful. Turns a random point on the surface of a sphere. And, oh, this is actually deprecated. And this is just going to be the most straightforward thing. So it can go from 0 to star prefabs dot length, and this will in fact, oh, is it return a float or something? Can I jink it to an integer, or okay? And now it will scan, or now it will scale with however many star prefabs we have. So if we want to add a couple more later, it will just scale. And now we have to simply say star prefabs at random sun type index. And more or less, we now have a random sun type being spawned. So let's just take a quick look if that's as simple as that. Alright, so if I start the game, barring everything is hooked up correctly, I should have exactly the same scene, but the sun should be different. And so we have a blue star. And the size isn't correct, but there it is. So if I turn this off and run it again, it should give a different star. And it did. Okay. So we're on the right track with that. We've got to deal with the sizes at some point, but that's basically on track to be correct. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so now we are considering like and the position might be very different if I do the thing I was talking about in the last hour where I galactically plot all the points. Vector 3.0 wouldn't make sense in that regard, but it makes sense for this particular case, so I'm going to leave it there for now. Okay, so now we've got to run more or less another random batch. And this random batch is going to determine how many total signatures are in the system. Okay, so and I'm considering this because like moons count as signatures, but they're kind of attached to planets. So if I have like a max signature count of 36, does that include the moons? I'm not sure. So I suppose for now, for simplicity, we'll say int we'll just say random signature count for now equals random.range, and it's actually just integers, and we can oh, see, I just noticed this. So this is inclusive, the floater is inclusive, but the integer one is exclusive. So that means I have to actually add 1 to this if it's an integer. Or wait a minute, no I don't. Because of the index, correct? So if the index is 5, it goes from 0 to 5, but 5 is excluded. And that's okay because the last element is 4 anyway. So I think this is still correct, okay. Same thing here, we're picking some kind of random range. But it's supposed to be an integer range. And I suppose you could have a star with no signatures, but that doesn't make any sense. So now I'm looking at a set of values up here. So public int minimum signature spawn count. And to the same degree, we're also looking at public int maximum signature spawn count. And this can simply be tweaked in the editor. So if I feel like 3 is too small and I want to bump it up to 5, I can just do that through the editor. So we'll yank this out and we'll just say minimum signature spawn count. And then it's, of course, it excludes the literal maximum, so I guess for now it's just fine. And for technicality's sake, I'll just say +1. Alright, so now that we have a random signature count, I'm basically just come in here and do a for loop. So for random signature count, I've got to more or less do this part. Instantiate stuff. But I just realized something. I've got to mix the randomness of the planets. Well, I guess I don't have to do that. Okay, so now I'm actually... Now I'm actually in debate on this because what I've done is I've split up the planets and the signatures, but more or less they are getting decided on here. Which means I could combine the arrays. And then if I combine the arrays more or less, okay, so that will work in one way, but then we're getting to a weird point where we could have like 30 planets around the sun. And like one signature, which is a little bizarre. If the random signature count actually gets up to like the dozens. It could yield to some very strange scenarios with planets, but I'm just not going to worry about it right now. More specifically, just what I want is some diversity of spawn for the player to have to scan through that diversity, basically. So I'm taking a look at this, and I've got an idea in my head of what to do. I'm trying to figure out how to formulate it. So basically, I have to get another random dot range between a very specific value or between a pair of very specific values and one way I could simplify this would be to just smush all the celestials together. So squeeze the planets and the signatures together, and then it would just pick from the array. However, what I lose in that regard is I lose the ability to fine-tune the ratios of planets to signatures, so essentially the only thing I can imagine then is I have to like add the okay, so I'll just start writing it out as I kind of think about it. So I have an integer for more or less planet range. And what this does is this is in fact going to skewer the results to have way more planets compared to signatures because there's like 7 planet types and only 2 sig types. So there's just going to be like a much higher % chance for there to be planets that spawn, but okay, that's fine for now. I can fine-tune the balance later on. I'll just call this like planet array range. And that is very simply the planet prefabs.length. I'm also going to need a similar int for signature array range, which is the same thing. It's just planet, or excuse me, signature prefabs.length. Then I have to do some special math here too. And I might even be able to stick these on the outside of the loop. Like this. And they're basically constant within the loop. And more or less, the random range is in fact from 0 to planet array range plus signature array range. And because it's exclusive, and we do, oh wait, hold on, no, it's, I think it does not have to be incremented by 1 in this case. And now we have another int, which is just total array range, is planet array range plus signature array range. And more or less, picking a random value within that array range, like this. And then more or less what we are doing is we are instantiating a certain prefab at random array range, random array index. The position is still unknown. It is at quaternion identity. And we still want to parent it, or child it to the active star system game object. Let me double check that that's correct. Okay. So to choose an element, we more or less actually need to use an if statement. And more or less if random array index is like less than planet array range, then more or less what's happening here is the instantiation is going to grab the instantiation object from the planet prefabs option. And we're still missing the position, so we'll leave that for now. But now it will randomly select, if I'm not mistaken, okay, so more or less what we've got 6 planet types, which means a random value less than 6 will yield an array element of 0 through 5, and it'll pick one, and then it will pick one of the stars. That makes sense. The tricky part now is in the event random array index is greater than or equal to planet array range, then we more or less, which I guess is the only other option available anyway, we are more or less actually copying this down here. I don't have to stipulate a case. However, we do have to do a little bit of particular math here. Because this will give an incorrect index. This will give an index of what? Let's see, 6 stars, 0 to 5, 2 elements, gives a signature range of 2, but they need to be 0 to 1. So we effectively have to subtract random array index from, in the event it's greater than or equal to planet array range, we simply have to subtract planet array range to get the value we need. And that will more or less, okay, so if there's 6 planets and 2 signatures, that means the random array index will be anywhere between 0 to 7. However, 0 to 5 can just plug in its value into the array. But if the value is 6 or 7, it in fact needs to reduce that by planet array range. So if there's 6 planets, 6 gets reduced to 0, which is correct. And if there's 6 planets, 7 gets reduced to 1, which is correct, 0 to 1, and it'll pick 0 to 1. So that's actually correct. And this should in fact, and this is also scalable, we can tweak the numbers of planets, and it's not hard-coded to anything in particular. Alright, well, so that was like not a lot of material progress. I got all the prefabs built, and I just started getting the random spawn for a system built. And it's actually almost done, because outside of balancing concerns, this effectively should instantiate the new planet or signature properly. The last thing I've got to do though is I've got to decide on the algorithm I'm going to use to actually position the planets. And I have two ideas for that. And effectively outside of this loop, depending on random signature count, however many random signatures there are, that many positions need to get tossed into an array, and then more or less array at I here and here plugs in the position. The only thing that has to happen is outside of the loop we have to calculate where those positions are, and my idea to do that is to actually use the Fibonacci sequence to like radially expand outside from the star, and that will be much more uniform than what I've tried to do in past attempts at working on the space game, which was like I used a straight XY grid. But if you use a random straight XY grid, like you can tell that the planets are lined up, and it doesn't look correct. So I've got to try using a Fibonacci sequence, either that or separate radius. And in each radius you then pick an arc off of the planet, and it just plugs in something into that space, which might not be as uniform. So I'll have to do some research on it and check it out, but one or the other will effectively create a controllable random dispersion system, and it'll probably work out pretty good. And from that we will have star systems capable of randomizing all of their signatures, which is exactly what we're looking for. So in the next video, that's what I'm going to be jumping on, is getting the spawning positions sorted out. That way I can, on each new play, the system will in fact be randomized, and that will allow each star system throughout the entire galaxy to be randomized as well. Alright, so that's what I've got so far. Thank you for checking out this video, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. Thank you for watching.